Welcome to the Heart of Tradition podcast. Today, one of our topics, the main topic, will be a multi-tiered medical paradigm and multi-tiered medical system, healthcare system, etc. Trying to get some ideas together on what the future could look like, or what a different idea could look like than the ideas which are usually proposed. Um, and so the basis of this idea is more of a multi-tiered system. So basically, this could work with education. This would work with anything. I mean, it works with everything. Basically, the body is set up in this multi-tiered way as well. So you have all these different levels of organization, which are leading towards the same sort of routes, and so learning to use them properly. Like, for example, as far as healthcare is concerned, having like a basic level of standard care, which may be taken care of by the government, very basic level. Then you would have a next level, which would have more. As you increase in the levels, you're going to have more. You're going to have a better care, a more embellished care, more options, more versatility, etc. So you're thinking, oh, well, that's already bad because then that means all the poor people are screwed. But this is basically a way to bring capitalism and the beauty of capitalism, not crony capitalism, but the beauty of pay as you go, over government equals free equals bureaucracy equals tax to pay for that. And so you want to move away from that seemingly free, like I lived in France for 15 years. It seems like healthcare is free, but when you look at your check and you see, oh, I made $1,500, I'm great, I'm happy with that. My friend makes $1,600 a month, I make 15, I'm okay. But then when you look at your paycheck, it says, whoa, I made 3,200 this month. But what are all these things that have been taken out? And people just kind of ignore that. In general, they just focus on, I'm getting 15, he's getting 17. That's where we're at. This is how we play our game. And so there's like a forced denial, not a forced denial. What would the word be? It's more like a voluntary denial that people play because they don't want to open up the can of worms that would undo their homeostasis with the system they're in. And this is like human behavior. So in general, people are going to stay in strong denial about anything that's going to question the way that they see that system, because otherwise they'd have to question the system. And any system, if psychology, will have masculine, feminine, this kind of structure to it. And so taking apart someone's system is taking apart a paternal, a father. All these things are in there, and what they've projected onto that, or what they've projected onto, you know, so you have like this kind of very difficult psychological material that will not just budge because you show someone an article or something. But it's true that if people are open to certain things, then they can start to take apart pieces of this. And maybe in their own life they may have to go through some sort of event or trauma or pain, or something that happens in their life, not on the negative side, hopefully, of trauma, but something positively traumatic, I guess you could say, that forces, painful, maybe a better word, that forces them to let go of their grip and maybe start looking at some of these ideas in a different way. That no one can help, really. That's on a personal level, and that's in an individual time with that person and their own issue. That's not something that can be forced on them. So this system of multi-tiered health would have as like a second layer of it would be, the biggest chunk of it, I guess you could say the middle layer or the middle class or whatever that is, would be tech involved. So tech would help, like apps and all these things, in order to bring about more of a network. You could have carpooling type of network, which would be health pooling, like there's ministry. What is it called? Healthcare ministry or health. I forget the exact name of this company that they're using. This name they're using. They have an app. It's called Healthcare Ministries, and so people confuse it with oh, it's a Christian thing, and it's like it's not really. It's actually open to all, but It's called Healthcare Ministries. There's one called Liberty Healthcare. There's a few of these bigger ones, but these are models that could be used. And so basically, imagine paying a couple $100 a month for your full health care, and then having an app which shows you when someone has cancer, someone has this, that, or the other in your neighborhood or this kind of area, and if you want to contribute more, you can. If not, it's not. It's all voluntary, and you also keep your minimum. And so this kind of grouping together of the people power and interstate commerce, allowing interstate competition for insurance rates and everything else, which would force everyone. It would force, because some states would go, okay, we're going to take this market and we're going to really lower these rates. And so that would force other states to go, well, maybe we should think about this because everybody's going to Idaho or whatever it is. So this kind of interstate competition is healthy, and this also would take time, these systems to come into place, but as they start building up bigger and bigger crowds or pools, then the insurance companies would fill the demand. It's just like with anything else. It's like, I guess, they had a butter shortage in Norway one time, and it was some high fat, low carb or whatever diet. And so they ran out of butter in Norway. And so you're like, oh, that's horrible. But like, not really, because like the people who are making dairy, a lot of those farms like doubled activity, and it just took a second. Like people started to, the market starts to meet the demand. And so, and then that's better because then there's more butter. And I mean, if you know what I know about butter, butter's like one of the number one medical foods in the world. And it's probably the most helpful to detoxify toxins and get them out of the body through the bile and all the other fertility vitamins that it contains for the skin and for fertility, which is basically health in general. Vitamins A, D, E, and K, and then the quality of that iodine as well. That's where a lot of iodine is stored if it's coastal or if there's, well, it doesn't, I guess some coasts don't have iodine, but depending on the coast and depending on the region, it can have a high concentration of iodine. So that's all sides. A little aside just to show you like how the demand can increase. It just takes a second. So as things start to build up, the insurers and the companies will start to come back online because there's money to be made. And so this second level is using tech. It's protected by government, meaning the government plays a role in protecting the rights of individuals to have access to these services, and to, and it's almost like a pay to play, but it's also, I mean, that's a horrible term, I guess, is a political term, but it's more like each person pays what they can. And so they're paying into the system, like, I guess you say single payer, but those are all government systems. This is not a government system. This is paying directly. So there's not a middleman. There's no one there's no administration at a high level to pay for. There's no subvention, and which is basically a tax, and so everything that's becomes subsidized. These are all subsidized, so that the taxpayers pay for that. So nothing is forced here. This is the opposite of thou shalt not steal. This is the opposite of that socialism model, which says let's steal it and redistribute it, and we will make the decisions. And this moves towards oligarchy, because then who makes the decisions, and and so and then eventually decisions, as we've seen in politics, then they're made against the populace. Like it's kind of like the Iraq War. Like 75% of the population didn't want to go, but we went anyway, and that was because, well, because the people once the power rises so much to the top, then they'll just oppose you anyway. I mean, at least as much as they can, until the people kind of get sick of it or whatever. So you have this type of abuse. So in this system, this tiered system of using tech app, there's also using the tech app way of getting the information out, the pooling through insurance companies. This is probably the best way to do it on a we the people type of way. Now, the government will play a role in keeping the corruption and other things down. It doesn't mean it's going to control the market, but it just guarantees the rights which back up the system, which is what the government does. I mean, the government is supposed to protect the Bill of Rights first and foremost, The Bill of Rights, you could say, oh, they don't talk about medical rights in there, but I mean, they do in a certain sense, because even the Fourth Amendment, talking about seizure of property and person, your person, your property, search and seizures, this is the basic amendment. And um, person and property also falls into not being vaccinated. That's your person, that's your property as well. You count as that, your own property and your person. I mean, so all of those things are protected under the Constitution, that somebody can't force you to vaccinate ever. And they know that. See, that's the thing, is they know it's anti-constitutional. So what they do is they say, well, let's just make it to where they can't bring their non-vaccinated children into our other owned properties, government-owned school properties, which I'm not really sure I believe in that either. But so then they are allowed to keep you out of their spaces. That they can do constitutionally to a certain degree if we tolerate it. But they can't force you to, the Fourth Amendment protects you from them forcing anything in your own body like that. So then people who do homeschooling, and I'm sure that a lot of homeschooled children end up becoming much more exceptional than a lot of what's happening now in this like super high school debt slash think tank Berkeley capital of free speech, now the anti-capital of free speech. There's just been a reversal. There's a whole leaning dogma in all of these universities which goes one direction. It's very PC and politically correct. It's hard to find differing viewpoints in certain places, and that's normal, I guess. I mean, college kids have a more, they have a certain viewpoint because they haven't moved out into, paying taxes and owning their own business and all these other things. So you learn things as you go. And I'm not saying you have to lean one side or the other, but you can find, you can find fiscally conservative people amongst the socially democratic people, people that want to, have like a more of a socially liberal viewpoint. You can find many fiscal conservatives amongst them, because a lot of Americans in general have this idea that they should be able to keep the fruits of their labor, and high tax is rarely enjoyed by anyone on any side. So, except for the political side, of course. But so these things can fall under a commonality if you turn off the TV and just talk to people. Like, there's not a lot of people who tell you, "Oh, I can't wait to get those taxes raised because I'm gonna," So there's some truth there. But so this second tiered system, this middle section of government protected rights through the Bill of Rights, and the tech allowing interstate competition, this is one thing that can help push things forward. Now, there's other people who mention creating like a bank account, kind of like a 401k, but more like a health bank account, health savings account for like a certain sum when you're born, and that being taken out of all the money that's been put in already. So you're getting back that money through your own like bank account, which will be open to stock market, to trading. And so allowing that, just like the 401ks have exploded now in the last, well, with the big, huge stock market rallies we've had over the last 2 years, 3 years. But so these things can also grow under that. And they would be protected as well for more like low long-term type of investments. And so there's a potential there to create some sort of emergency fund, or for most people to have something which is could also be used in the way that charter schools are used, in the sense that once the government has gotten so big, the only way to get it smaller is the transitional stage of trying to give some of that money back that is invested in that state back to the people. Even though the government's not completely out of the way yet, this is the first intermediary phase. So a charter school, what do? They say, okay, all this money that we have allotted for $5,000 per child, or whatever the number is, well, we're going to send this back to you, and if you can create a charter school with 100 students, well, then you'll get this money, and so per year or whatever, and this will be coming from your own money that was already in the system. And so because of this, it's just basically giving the choice back to the people with the money that they already had put aside and delegated to the government, but it's now redelegating it back to the people but allowing them their money and not keeping their money as it delegates back. So this is an intermediary phase, and it's important. And so this could happen in healthcare, like these healthcare bank accounts or whatever. Another interesting idea which could change healthcare is the blockchain technology, and using the blockchain technology as a middleman eliminator, which is a great, it eliminates all the bank middleman administration, taxation, and fees and things, and it pulls you into a very free form way to invest in healthcare, to invest in mental health care. I mean, imagine a type of blockchain um, slash. I mean, I don't know if it has to be Bitcoin or virtual currency. It could be through your own currency, but a blockchain way of investing into smaller and smaller companies that are not accessible to a typical um, stock market exchange. They're not that big, but you're able to invest through the blockchain in these many different small avenues. It's like, if you want to invest in the Meadows or some sort of rehab clinic, or you want to invest here, this blockchain would allow for an easy access point, and then not only just the blockchain to keep things honest and even traceable and legal and fair, where anybody can see what's happening in this world, these investments and what's happening here. And so it's almost like the opposite of a black bank account, because everything is like transparent. And so this allows for a better and faster, a more lubricated way to use money for things that are needed to build the community. And this could be attached to every local um, entity that so desires to be invested in, or is seeking um, that type of to expand or whatever. So imagine that placed on a lot of these hospitals and clinics and different types of entities that you've found to be, sober livings, or whatever you find as an individual that can be useful for people to get back to work, or whatever you feel like is a good way to invest. I mean, unless you're doing it just purely from a monetary standpoint where you're just looking to invest, that's another way. But so imagine having even in the worlds of mental health and all these places that have been kind of like, taboo because they've been government controlled, or government mixed with some sort of government rules and regulations inhibiting any sort of not only volunteer work and other things, but also inhibiting any sort of investment or change in the way that the money is distributed. So this breaks through that whole cycle and allows people to invest properly in thousands of small things, and all through technology applications and everything else, transparency through the blockchain, and even having, once again, the government protecting our rights is what they're supposed to be doing as we operate in these areas. So, and they're them playing only that role. Not, it's almost like a listening and an availability of rights type of role, and not a we are going to control anything about the interiors of this. And so that offstandish approach is where the sphere of rights should be placed. It shouldn't. It's placed more in a listening role, an adaptation role, and a calibration through listening role, than it is through a creative role where it does any sort of creative add-ons. It's basically enforcing the laws, and it has that feature while it's listening to the actors on both sides and trying to determine, how to make sure that everyone has equal access, and that these things are provided for all, like, non-discrimination and things like that. But in no way is it trying to get in there and change any of the inner mechanics, which is basically what happened over the last 8 years, is all the nationalizing of everything. We had the nationalization of schools. The tuitions jumped up. I mean, it's very easy. You've got these accreditation schemes, these schools that are not even government, regulated, but private sector. And you could say, well, oh, that goes against your argument, because, well, it doesn't really, because it all depends on who's doing the protecting part of the law and who's doing the actual creative part of the law. And so you can reverse these roles, and then you get everything gets backwards, right? And you can reverse them because then the private would be maybe a way to set up a association model, 1901 or whatever it is, association, and you could use that to force people into your union, or to force people to adhere, um, um, even though that's not legally allowed. And so you're allowed to give yourself a certain legal status in the private sector, which allows you to operate in a different way. So what I'm saying is you can use the private sector too to abuse for things that typically should be government regulated. So there's in those areas we want to be careful. So we have to find out. It's all the government's not about just minarchy, which is just getting the smallest amount possible everywhere. I used to think that was what it was. I think it's more about getting the government to lose some weight here, to gain some muscle here, and to be a slim, well operating machine, I guess, that allows for what it was intended, which is to protect the rights of its citizens. And so and to enforce those rights. That's was the nature of it. But so we have to get it back to that shape, that size. It's gotten too fat in some areas, and so, like, for example, education. The charter school movement is great because it's a first transition out of that. This healthcare idea that could be done in this way, is also a way out of that, a transitional way out of that, leading to a fuller, bigger free market approach to this. So the Obama way and this way of like pretending that we're, going after the insurance companies, but actually working with the insurance companies to allow for them to all be able to force hundreds of millions of people to have insurance that otherwise may or may not have had it. This is a big cash cow. And so then they're able to draw the accords behind the scenes. And so it's not we're going after the insurance people. No, we're actually eliminating a lot of competition here and pushing more oligarchy, more monopoly, more two or three big companies, and then we're going to work with them, and they're going to be our chosen companies. They're actually going to be private companies, but somehow they're going to be protected from competition through the government's choice of using them in this huge scam. So this is kind of more of a fascist system where you mix the corporation and the government together in such a way that like there's the interest can go against the people and go towards just those interests. So government protects this entity from protection from the throes of competition, which is what is needed to get the prices right in the free market. So it's the same for the school tuition. Like I was saying, the accreditation. Um, these institutions that give accreditation for all these different universities, and they call the universities the cartel universities. They all work together. They know who gets the accreditation, who doesn't. There's a whole bunch of laws and regulations written on that to where you cannot get accredited if you don't walk the party line to a certain degree, and so that's easy to control. And even though these entities are pretending to be outside, they're just third party or whatever, there's still a collusion between these forces, and we'd have to be naive to think otherwise, especially as the cartel schools are continuing to raise their tuition. They're continuing to I mean, all this accreditation allows for a raise in tuition. All of this nationalized money, the government loans were used to be backed. They were backed government loans. They were private sector loans that were backed by the government. Now, since Obama, they've become full government direct loans, like with a direct line to the Treasury. And so this is a whole different animal. The private sector has been completely outed. And so this is a nationalization of that industry. So as soon as you nationalize it, all this money comes in. And once money comes in, people start making mistakes because they think they've got it made. And so the cartel schools are like, let's raise our tuition because they're going to have all this money coming through the system. So we've got access to the Treasury. We got a direct line here. Let's raise our tuition. Let's buy a bunch of stuff we didn't really need that doesn't focus on education. Paintings and libraries and the library, I guess you could say, is already there typically, but but more like extra structural stuff and art and grounds and all these things, which do not always affect the quality of the education, but they're spending in these directions because the money's coming through. So it's kind of like a go for it, like gravy pipeline where you can just spend what you want. And so that's what's happening. And so the tuitions go up, and they shouldn't be, but they're going up. The accreditation plays its role, and the government plays its role. So the whole system creates this huge debt. I mean, we were like 200 billion with this school loan problem, before 10 years ago, and now we're up to like over a trillion. So it's like things have blown up way beyond because of the nationalization. So every time government gets involved, a lot of times it, in the wrong ways, it destroys the creative aspect of and the competitive aspect. And so we don't want to do that. That also could be said about the Obamacare, the healthcare system, where it does the same to competition and brings about more oligarchy. Now, of course, everybody would like to see a healthcare system to some degree, so that's why I'm making this podcast. But we have to understand how not only the housing, buying Freddie Mae and Fannie Mac, and how they use that money to nationalize and to siphon off money from there to even pay for Obamacare, because the Congress didn't approve some of the Obamacare amendments, and so they decided to fund it outside of the Congress, which is illegal, and to use that money from Fannie and Freddie Mac to fund part of Obamacare. And that's why part of it seemed to be such a good deal at the beginning, because it's like, wow, we're getting all this for free, really? But it was coming from somewhere else, the money. And then once that money starts to run out, the premiums go up. So it's almost like a heist, and so we have to be careful to that. And so we need another system that's more creative and less governmental. And so that's what all this buzz is about. They're trying to keep us from finding out the true prize, which is like people power, and how we can do this without a middleman. And so using tech and using the blockchain and using different technologies that are already there available to us to connect the systems and do the organizational side, and then the pooling side, and then that creating a demand that creates more companies coming back online, and we go through a 10-year period of transition or whatever to build back up. It's the same with the steel industry or anything else that manufacturing we've lost. It takes a while to get everything back on, but it can come back on. So as the demand grows, people show up. And so that is like, so that's the second layer system. The third layer, I don't know. I'm doing all this live. I haven't fully thought about this in one at one exact time. I came up with different pieces of this, but just the higher level of it would be more money is paid in for more more alternative healthcare, more homeopathy, like bringing in more educational prevention, preventive medicine, naturopathy. All these other things can be brought in on the top level as like the higher level of choice, and not just meaning it all has to be just much more expensive. It's just more and more add-ons depending on what you can afford. Those add-ons may also have cheap versions at different levels too, but these all would be added to that system and allow you to really build your health care system out of that. Now, I personally believe that education is the biggest key to healthcare anyway. I've never even used healthcare in my life, even when I had it for free, technically. That's what they call it, but it's not free at all in France, and I never used it. So and the one time I did use it, which was to get a root canal done, I had a lot of health problems that came after that, and I had to figure out eventually that it was the root canal that was causing it. And so I went back home and paid $5,000 and got that stuff done right by a much higher level doctor than I could have ever found in France, and even the technologies they were using. And so it's like I had to learn that even that one thing I did, like I had to go another way. So, so education is going to be the biggest piece of this, and once the education is there, then we won't need as much intensity around this topic. But we have to get to that, and so we have to come back down off of that. There's a lot of natural things and trifectas, I say, but more like combining these synergies of natural products and knowing how to combine them, knowing how to use food in a repetitive way, and what food to use. And typically they're foods that most people have never heard of, but they're sacred foods that came to us from our ancestors. And being able to use these and combine these in a way to bring health back um, to anyone through understanding of food as nutrition as a remedy. Um, so, if you take the example of healthcare, if you look at the cost of it, what's blown up healthcare, the real costs of healthcare have been blown up from high drug prices, which is due to lack of competition and this segmented competition racket that they have throughout Europe and different parts of the world where we're not really free to compete. There's too many regulations, like they were saying that in Canada they get the same drugs for 1/3 the price or even less. And so there's kind of a heist there on how to. There's a lot of ways in which they'll try their best, just like any wheeler or dealer kind of entity. They're going to try their best to get the highest price they can in any given market based on those laws and regulations. And so we've got the wrong people in power for a long time. I mean, when the FDA is owned by Monsanto executives pretty much for the last 50 or 60 years, you'd have to be naive to think that there wasn't all sorts of pollution going on, and everything from water to air to food to, I mean, it's like almost impossible to find a chicken that doesn't have 30 or 40% of its food is soy. It's almost impossible. And at an industrial level or, even a Whole Foods level, it's becoming impossible because they just have done it this way. And so you have to reach out and find other ways to do that. They're out there, but you just have to find a deeper strata. Farmers markets and even ordering online from farms in Pennsylvania, Amish, or different places. There's a lot of ways you can do it, but you just have to find new ways, smaller networks, Weston Price chapters, whatever. And you can find the right food. But so this is also a big part of healthcare, of course. So, but we have to transition towards that. And so all of these options can help us find, first, pulling the government out, and then second, getting back down to the right size in our own personal life. The other cost of healthcare is administration. They say 1/3 of healthcare is administration. And then a certain percentage is also in lawsuits and things like that. But so the administration has blown up over the years with, sometimes some hospitals having tripled or quadrupled their administrative side underneath the government expansion of healthcare. And so this happens everywhere. And so we have to be careful of this type of, well, the money's coming in, we might as well expand out, this kind of thing. And then a lot of money also gets spent on things that don't bring any betterment to healthcare. This is why a lot of people accuse governments in general of mishandling all of these affairs. And so there's kind of like a natural sentiment that the government does a bad job with a lot of these things. So we have to get we have to understand these things if we want to move forward and find a better system. So, for example, if we wanted, this is on a side note, but if you want to talk about like another entity which could be interesting, think about the post office. The post office is kind of as part of the government, and it's a central part. And this is something that has been gutted out since the 80s and shifted around and even subsidized and allowed other actors, including Amazon and other companies, to take some of those subsidies insofar as discounts and things like that they give to them for their volume. And so, but they're actually also using some of the taxpayer money to to discount. And so there's this idea that we've weakened that central core there. So this is one of the places where the government needs to get stronger. It doesn't have enough strength there. It's not that it's fat and lazy in this area. This one, it needs strength. It needs to be strong. So imagine if the government was to take over the post office. I mean, it already owns the post office. But what I'm saying, imagine if the government was able to remarket the post office and build email system, kind of like Google or whatever, um, uh, the Parliament was to go along, the Congress, and was to bring back, just like the rights that we have, copyright. You have a certain amount of time on copyright law, and then it becomes public property. So the same could happen for the search commons. The commons, all these keywords and search words, most of these have been developed now for a decade, and so we need to find a way to bring those back into commons. And then once they come into the commons, more competition will come out because Google will not own these search terms as per se as the investment that they've put behind these. And this will come back down into the commons. This will open up competition to Google at a higher level. More people will be able to play on that field. Um, the government's postal creation of email system, which is certified email, meaning it has, it's not being read by everyone, but your data being sold, and everybody, all your, like Google has access to all of that, and so they sell all of that information. They've been caught doing it. Facebook as well. So this would bring back certified email. This would bring back something which is could be private and not used against you in that sense. So this is another way that we could bring some wisdom back here. Now, not only would that allow, they could also bring into that system of certified email an internet system, and the internet system with the commons being part of it as a search system. So that search system could also compete with Google. This could also be, I mean, can you imagine like if the post office was to go forward with something like this in a good way and it was attractive because they have all the numbers, like I think everybody would sign up for it. And especially if they knew that it would counterbalance the whole system and allow for healthier competition. Now you're like, wow, government allowing for healthy competition? That doesn't make any sense. But it's basically, get in this area, it does. Because this is the area that the government is supposed to control. This is critical infrastructure. This is our communication. These are our rights, like live, in how we communicate, not only military or other communications. I mean, not just military, but we have high level people working through all of these Google and Facebook and all. So this is a protected version of that, which is protected by the Bill of Rights. So you have the certified email, you have the search terms, which are not to be used against the citizens or their data or any of these other things, which is being allowed there. You also have the post office gaining, building up its own network um, of internet servers and allowing for, like I said, search terms and having, there could be even more of a web space dedicated to that, more website development through a more privatized network that came through government protections. There could be a lot of things that could be interesting about this. Because that would be reinforced by the laws of the land instead of just being totally off on the private sector. This is one of the places where that makes perfect sense. So Amazon would also have to compete at this point because the government would push them out of their discount bracket and bring back more, not only more revenue through all of these ideas, but also that would help balance them out, their need to be able to be fair with the law instead of having to be forced to give away some of their discounts to Amazon or whatever because they are lacking in revenue. So it's all about strengthening that system to where that system can finally push out those actors which are siphoning off of the communication. And through that standard, they're siphoning that, and they're able to use that. Well, in the case of Amazon, through shipping or whatever. But and they'll have to set up their own systems, which is good because this will allow for a certain system to be protected and to have a different type of legal background to it. So this post office thing sounds very innocent, but it could change the whole paradigm. It would put like the biggest from Facebook. I mean, you could even have a sharing platform within there, which could be like a Facebook, but that doesn't control all of your data, that all those things are protected. Now you're saying, oh, you're going to trust the government with all that. And it's like, well, here's the deal, is there has to be a trust between the people and the government to a certain degree. You can't like just have a government and then hate it. That's one of the things I didn't understand about the American kind of. I understood the fear of government that came with our development as a nation, but what I don't understand is that at a certain point you have to right size that government and then be able to trust the government in the well defined role that it's been given. But the people have to stay on that well defined boundary kind of way of thinking. And so but once, if people are on that way of thinking, then we can trust the government to operate within that level because it operates as an extension of us. It's all about us not dropping the ball to a certain degree and keeping the government well defined in its roles. So that takes a lot of education. There's a lot of, you could say that's totally overly optimistic, but like this is where it has to get to, where they can find balance. Is we have to find we can't find balance just through hating the government because we need the government for certain things. We delegate some of these things. This is part of structural intelligence, to delegate the roads and the post office and things like that to this system, which it can work for the people. And have their own system. So there's a need to have some trust and even a little love there, but it's all about us having the right boundaries, right? So otherwise, why even have a government, and if we're just going to be anti-government the whole time, it's like, no, you got to get things the right size. That's what this is all about. And that's what harmony is all about anyway, is just the balance. It's like it's like the weights on each side, you got to get it right, for there to be balance. And so so that's a very interesting idea. I think the post office is such a central idea. This also could apply to tuition and school. Moving the school completely, like moving the government completely out of the school loan process and just getting them out of there completely. And once that happens, banks will be forced to compete, and the tuition will have to go down because they'll be forced to compete as well. And then if the accreditation schemes and things are investigated and to allow for the government to be able to either get involved or protect how that process works through the proper framework, in that regulatory capacity, which can be good to make sure that those standards are not being used to favor cartels or favor this, that, and the other, and the right laws have to be made. You can punish in universities that all that have tons of students who can't pay their student loans. The universities could also be paying part of that because they signed all these students up. And you could say, wow, that doesn't sound right. Yeah, it does, because you're basically putting responsibility throughout the whole system. Not allowing people to file for bankruptcy, all these stuff. These are like cash cows for these banks, because they're like, all right, we don't have to have any consequences and we can just push forward. So all of these laws have to be re-questioned and put back into place, where the bank has to take some risk, the university takes some risk, everybody's taking some of the risk, and it's not all just on the student. Like, everybody has to play a part in the risk. I mean, that's what any type of exchange is about, like any type of monetary exchange or otherwise, even a relationship. There's risk involved, there's vulnerability, there's a lot of things there. So we have to use our common wisdom about even just interpersonal relationships and apply that to this system to a certain degree, or at least be informed with that. But so that all of these things can work. I think you can have a health system which works better for all people, and even the poor, even all different substrata, once the system is done right and the government is out of the way, except for where it needs to be as a structural legal entity behind, which is protecting the citizens' rights as denoted in the Bill of Rights. And so as it's protecting those rights, you will see that it starts to allow for it finds its right place. It's almost like, I see it as like being the skeleton, the material skeleton part of that system, but it's not. But then there's all the soul and life and body and the blood and all these other things that compose a being, and they're all there, and they need to be there. Those are the creative parts. Not to say that there's not creativity in the skeleton, of course there is, but what I'm saying is, like, this has more of just a structural role behind it, like which is helping to guide some things, but the rest needs to be on top of that lattice. And it might not even be the skeleton. That might not be the right word. It may just be a wire within the skeleton, which is just more basic. But there, that something that's behind, that's allowing for the laws to be encoded and protect the citizens in their creative efforts and what they choose to undertake, and the government not playing a role in that creativity, but playing a role just in its listening to their creativity and allowing their rights to be protected. So hopefully this made some sense to some people. I know I was all over the place, but I do feel that like some of these topics are so vast and they can go so deep, and there's so much political stuff. Like I'm not going any direction politically on this. I'm just trying to show you where there's errors been made and a better way to go about it. I personally am not a big, I don't trust either party in politics generally. I mean, they both seem to have been infested, to such a high degree. And this the whole DC circuit and just everything, even the judges. I mean, it's like everything's so infested, but the people have to get their power back. The people have to start making sense of this in their mind, articulating this. And then from there, from that wisdom, they will co-create that future. So it's not going to come from some president or some, just looking up fashion that we all stare up into space and hope that this thing saves us. It's going to come through us sharpening and learning about boundaries, learning about how these things work, learning about how the political system works even, and common law and constitution, not even constitutional law, because sometimes that's just an interpretation of the Constitution, but reading the Constitution itself and trying to figure out what those words mean, what that points to, and so getting an idea of how this could come together. Thanks.